Welcome to First Chapter Friday. I'm Rosie and I'm an aide at the Lewis County Public Library. Today I'll be reading Janet Evanovich's One for the Money. I hope you're going to enjoy this. There are some men who enter a woman's life and just screw it up forever. Joseph Morelli did this to me, not forever, but periodically. Morelli and I were both born and raised in a blue-collar chunk of Trenton called the Burg. Houses were attached and narrow, yards were small, cars were American, and the people were mostly of Italian descent with enough Hungarians and Germans thrown in to offset inbreeding. It was a good place to buy a calzone or play the numbers. And if you had to live in Trenton anyway, it was an okay place to raise a family. When I was a kid, I didn't ordinarily play with Joseph Morelli. He lived 2 blocks over and was 2 years older. Stay away from them Morelli boys, my mother had warned me. They're wild. I hear stories about the things they do to girls when they get them alone. What kind of things? I eagerly asked. You don't want to know, my mother answered. Terrible things. Things that are not nice. From that moment on, I viewed Joseph Morelli with a combination of terror and curiosity that borders on awe. 2 weeks later, at the age of 6, with quaking knees and a squishy stomach, I followed Morelli into his father's garage on the promise of learning a new game. The Morelli garage hunkered detached and snubbed at the edge of their lot. It was a sorry affair, lit by a single shaft of light filtering through a grime-coated window. Its air was stagnant, smelling of corner musk, discarded tires, and jugs of used motor oil. Never destined to house the Morelli cars, the garage served of other purposes. Old man Morelli used the garage to take his belt to his sons. His sons used the garage to take their hands to themselves. And Joseph Morelli took me, Stephanie Plum, to the garage to play train. What's the name of this game? I asked Joseph. Choo-choo, he said, down on his hands and knees, crawling between my legs, his head wrapped up underneath my short pink skirt. You're the tunnel and I'm the train. I suppose this tells you something about my personality, that I may not be especially good at taking advice, or that I was born with an overload of curiosity. Or maybe it's about rebellion or boredom or fate. At any rate, it was a one-shot deal, and darn disappointing since I only gotten to be the tunnel and I really wanted to be the train. 10 years later, Joseph Morelli was still living 2 blocks over. He'd grown up big and bad with eyes like black fire one minute and melt in your mouth chocolate the next. He had an eagle tattooed on his chest, tight-ass, narrow-hip swagger, and reputation for having fast hands and clever fingers. My best friend, Mary Lou Molnar, said she heard Morelli had a tongue like a lizard. Holy cow, I answered. What's that supposed to mean? Just don't let him get you alone or you'll find out. Once he gets you alone, that's it. You're done for. Well, I hadn't seen much of Morelli since the train episode, and I suppose he had enlarged his repertoire of sexual exploitation. I opened my eyes wide and leaned closer to Mary Lou, hoping for the worst. You aren't talking about rape, are you? I'm talking about lust. If he wants you, you're doomed. The guy is irresistible. Aside from being fingered at the age of 6 by you-know-who, I was untouched. I was saving myself for marriage, or at least for college. I'm a virgin, I said, as if this was news. I'm sure he doesn't mess with virgins. He specializes in virgins. The brush of his fingertips turned virgins into slobbering mush. 2 weeks later, Joseph Morelli came into the bakery where I worked every day after school. Tasty Pasty on Hamilton, he brought a chocolate chip cannoli and told me he joined the Navy and charmed the pants off of me 4 minutes after closing on the floor of Tasty Pastry behind the case filled with chocolate eclairs. The next time I saw him, I was 3 years older. I was on my way to the mall driving my father's Buick when I spotted Morelli standing in front of Giovanni's meat market. I gunned the big V8 engine, jumped the curb, and clipped Morelli from behind, bouncing him off the front right fender. I stopped the car and got out to assess the damage. Anything broken? He was sprawled on the pavement looking up my skirt, my leg, he said. Good. Then I turned on my heel, got into the Buick, and drove to the mall. I attribute the incident to temporary insanity, and in my own defense, I'd like to say I haven't run over anybody since. During winter months, wind ripped up Hamilton Avenue, whining past plate glass windows, banking trash against curbs and storefront. During summer months, the air sat still and gauzy, laden with humidity, saturated with hydrocarbons. It shimmered over hot cement, melted road tar. Cicadas buzzed, dumpsters reeked, and dusty haze hung in perpetuity over softball fields statewide. I figured it was all part of the great adventure of living in New Jersey. This afternoon, I decided to ignore the August buildup of ozone catching me in the back of my throat and go, convertible top down, in my Mazda Miata. The air conditioner was blasting flat out. I was singing along with Paul Simon. My shoulder-length brown hair was sweeping around my face in a frenzy of frizz and snarls, and my ever-vigilant blue eyes were coolly hidden behind my Oakleys, and my foot rested heavy on the gas pedal. It was Sunday, and I had a date with a pot roast at my parents' house. I stopped for a light and checked my rearview mirror, swearing when I saw Lenny Gruber 2 car lengths behind in a tan sedan. I thumped my forehead on the steering wheel. Damn, I'd gone to high school with Gruber. He was a maggot then, and he was a maggot now. Unfortunately, he was a magnet with a just cause. I was behind on my Miata payments, and Gruber worked for the repo company. 6 months ago, when I bought the car, I'd been looking good, with a nice apartment, season tickets to the Rangers, and then bam, I got laid off. No money, no A1 credit rating. I rechecked the mirror, set my teeth, and yanked up the emergency brake. Lenny was like smoke. When you tried to grab him, he evaporated. So I wasn't about to waste this one last opportunity to bargain. I hauled myself out of the car, apologized to the man caught between us, and stalked back to Gruber. Stephanie Plum, Gruber said, full of joy and fake surprise. What a treat. I leaned 2 hands on the roof and looked through the open window at him. Lenny, I'm going to my parents' house for dinner. You wouldn't snatch my car while I was at my parents' house, would you? I mean, that would be really low, Lenny. I'm a pretty low guy, Steph, and that's why I got this neat job. I'm capable of most anything. The light changed, and the driver behind Gruber leaned on his horn. Maybe we can make a deal, I said to Gruber. Does this deal involve you getting naked? I had a vision of grabbing his nose and twisting it Three Stooges style until he squealed like a pig. Problem was, it involved touching him. Better to go with a more restrained approach. Let me keep the car tonight and I'll drive it to the lot first thing tomorrow morning. No way, Gruber said. You're damn sneaky and I've been chasing after this car for 5 days. So one more won't matter. I expect you to be grateful, you know what I mean. I almost gagged. Forget it, take the car. In fact, you could take it right now. I'll walk to my parents. Gruber's eyes were locked halfway down my chest. I'm a 36B, respectable but far from the overwhelming on my 5'7" frame. I was wearing black spandex shorts and an oversized hockey jersey. Not what you would call a seductive outfit, but Lenny was ogling anyway. His smile widened enough to show he was missing them over. I guess I could wait for tomorrow. After all, we did go to high school together. It was the best I could do. 5 minutes later, I turned off of Hamilton onto Roosevelt, 2 blocks from my parents' house, and I could feel obligation sucking at me, pulling me into the heart of the burg. This was a community of extended families. There was safety here, along with love and stability, and the comfort of ritual. The clock on the dash told me I was 7 minutes late, and the urge to scream told me I was home. I parked at the curb, looked at the narrow 2-story duplex with its front porch and aluminum awning. The plum half was yellow, just as it had been for 40 years, with a brown shingled roof. Snowball bushes flanked either side of the cement stoop. Red geraniums had been evenly spaced the length of the porch. It was basically a flat. Living room in front, dining room in the middle, kitchen at the rear. 3 bedrooms and a bath upstairs. It was a small, tidy house crammed with kitchen smells and too much furniture, comfortable with its lot in life. Next door, Miss Evanovich, who was living on Social Security and could afford close-out paint colors, had painted her side lime green. My mother was at the open screen. "Stephanie," she called, "what are you doing sitting out there in your car? You're late for dinner. You know how your father hates to eat late. The potatoes are getting cold, and the pot roast will be dry." Food is important in the burg. The moon revolves around the earth revolves around the sun, and the burg revolves around pot roast. For as long as I can remember, my parents' lives have been controlled by 5-pound pieces of rolled rump done perfection at 6 o'clock. Grandma Mauser stood 2 feet back from my mother. "I gotta get me a pair of those," she said, eyeballing my shorts. I still got pretty good legs, you know. She raised her skirt and looked down at her knees. "What do you think? You think I'd look good in them biker things?" Grandma Mauser had knees like doorknobs. She had been a beauty in her time, but the years had turned her slack skin and spindle-boned. Still, if she wanted to wear biker shorts, I thought she should go for it. The way I saw it, that was one of the many advantages to living in New Jersey. Even old ladies were allowed to look outlandish. My father gave a grunt of disgust from the kitchen, where he was carving up the meat. "Biker shorts," he muttered, slapping his palm against his forehead. Ugh. 2 years ago, when Grandpa Moser fat clogged artery sent him to the big pork roast in the sky. Grandma Moser had moved in with my parents and had never moved out. My father accepted this with the combination of old world stoicism and tactless mutterings. I remember him telling me about a dog he had as a kid. The story goes that this dog was the ugliest, oldest, most pea-brained dog ever. The dog was incontinent, dribbling urine wherever it went. Its teeth were rotted in its mouth, its hips were fused solid with arthritis, and huge fatty tumors lumped under its hide. One day, my grandpa took the dog out behind the garage and shot it. I suspected there was times when my father fantasized a similar ending for my grandma Mauser. You should wear a dress, my mother said to me, bringing green beans and cream pearl onions to the table. 30 years old and you're still dressing in those teeny bopper outfits. How will you ever catch a man like that? I don't want a man. I had one and I didn't like it. That's because your husband was a horse's behind, Grandma Mauser said. I agreed. My ex-husband had been a horse's behind, especially when I caught him on the dining room table with Joyce Barnhart. I heard Loretta Buzzic's boy is separated from his wife, my mother said. You remember him, Ronald Buzzick? I knew where she was headed and I didn't want to go there. I'm not going out with Ronald Buzzick, I told her. Don't even think about it. So what's wrong with Ronald Buzzick? Ronald Buzzick was a butcher. He was balding, he was fat, and I suppose I was being a snob about the whole thing, but I found it hard to think in romantic terms about a man who spent his days stuffing giblets up chicken butts. My mother plunged on. All right then, how about Bernie Kuntz? I saw Bernie Kuntz in the dry cleaners, and he made a point about asking for you. I think he's interested. I could invite him over for coffee and cake. With the way my luck was running, probably my mother had already invited Bernie, and at this very moment, he was circling the block, popping Tic Tacs. I don't want to talk about Bernie, I said. There's something I need to tell you. I have some bad news. I'd been dreading this and had put it off for as long as possible. My mother clamped a hand to her mouth and said, You found a lump in your breast. No one in our family had ever found a lump in their breast, but my mother was ever watchful. My breast is fine. The problem is with my job. Well, what about your job? I don't have one. I got laid off. Laid off, she said on a sharp inhale. How could that happen? It was such a good job. You loved that job. I'd been a discount lingerie buyer for E.E. Martin, and I'd worked in Newark, which is not exactly the garden spot of the Golden State. In truth, it had been my mother who had loved the job, imagining it to be glamorous when in reality I mostly haggled over the cost of full-fashion nylon underpants. E.E. Martin wasn't exactly Victoria's Secret. I wouldn't worry, my mother said. There's always work for lingerie buyers. There's no work for lingerie buyers, especially ones who work for E.E. Martin. Having held a salary position with E.E. Martin made me as appealing as the leper. E.E. Martin had skimped on the palm greasing this winter, and as a result, its mob affiliations were made public. The CEO was indicted for illegal business practices. E.E. Martin sold out to Valcott Incorporated. and through no fault of my own, I was caught in the house cleaning sweep. I've been out of work for 6 months. 6 months? And I didn't know? Your own mother didn't know you were out on the streets? I'm not out on the streets. I've been doing temporary jobs, filing and stuff, and steadily sliding downhill. I was registered with every search firm in the greater Trenton area, and I religiously read the want ads. I wasn't being all that choosy drawing the line at telephone soliciting and kennel attendant, but my future did not look great. I was overqualified for the entry level, and I liked experience in management. My father forked another slab of pot roast onto his plate. He'd worked for the post office for 30 years and had opted for an early retirement. Now he drove a cab part-time. I saw your cousin Benny yesterday. He said he's looking for someone to do filing. You should give him a call. Just the career move I'd been hoping for, filing for Benny. Of all my relatives, Benny was my least favorite. Benny was a worm, a sexual lunatic, and a dog turd. What does he pay? I asked. My father shrugged. Gotta be minimum wage. Wonderful. The perfect position for someone already in the depths of despair. Rotten boss, rotten job, rotten pay. The possibilities for feeling sorry for myself would be endless. And the best part is that it's close, my mother said. You can come home every day for lunch. I nodded numbly, thinking I'd sooner stick a needle in my eye. Sunlight slanted through the crack in my bedroom curtains. The air conditioning unit in the living room window droned ominously, predicting another scorch of a morning, and the digital display on my clock radio flashed electric blue numbers, telling me it was 9 o'clock. The day had started without me. I'd rolled out of bed on a sigh, shuffled into the bathroom. When I was done in the bathroom, I shuffled into the kitchen and stood in front of the refrigerator, hoping the refrigerator fairies had visited during the night. I opened the door and stared at the empty shelves, noting that food hadn't magically cloned itself from the smudges to the butter keeper and the shriveled flotsam of the bottom of the crisper. Half a jar of mayonnaise, a bottle of beer, whole wheat bread covered with blue mold, a head of iceberg lettuce, shrink wrapped in brown slime and plastic, and a box of hamster nuggets stood between me and starvation. I wondered if 9 in the morning was too early to drink beer. Of course, in my scale, it would be 4 in the afternoon. That was good enough. I drank half the beer and grimly approached the living room window. I pulled the curtains and stared down at the parking lot. My Miata was gone. Lenny had hit it early. No surprise, but still, it lodged painfully in the middle of my throat. I was now an official deadbeat. And if that wasn't depressing enough, I weakened halfway through dessert and promised my mother I'd go see Benny. I dragged myself into the shower and stumbled out a half an hour later after an exhausting crying jag. I stuffed myself into pantyhose and a suit and was ready to do my daughterly duty. My hamster Rex was still asleep in his soup can in the cage on the kitchen counter. I dropped a few hamster nuggets into his bowl and made some smoochy sounds. Rex opened his black eyes and blinked. He twitched his whiskers, gave a good sniff, and rejected the nuggets. I couldn't blame him. I tried them for breakfast yesterday and hadn't been impressed. I locked up the apartment and walked 3 blocks down to St. James to Blue Ribbon's used cars. At the front of the lot was a $500 Nova begging to be bought. Total body rust, countless accidents has left the Nova barely recognizable as a car, much less than a Chevy. But Blue Ribbon was willing to trade the beast for my TV and VCR. I threw in my food processor and microwave, and they paid my registration and taxes. I drove the Nova out of the lot and went straight to Vinny's. I pulled in the parking space at the corner of Hamilton and Overton, extracted the key from the ignition, and waited for the car to thrash itself off. I said a short prayer not to be spotted by anyone I knew, reached the door open, and scuttled the short distance to the storefront office. The blue and white sign over the door read, Vincent and Plum, Bell Bonding Company. In smaller letters, it advertised 24 hours nationwide service, conveniently located between Tender Loving Care Dry Cleaners and Filarello's Deli. Vincent Plum catered to the family trade, domestic disturbances, disorderlies, auto theft, DWI, and shoplifting. The office was small and generic, consisting of 2 rooms with cheap walnut paneling on the walls and commercial-grade rust-colored carpet on the floor. A Danish modern couch, upholstered in brown naugahyde, pressed against one wall of the reception area, and a black and brown metal desk with multi-line phones and a computer terminal occupied a far corner. Benny's secretary sat behind the desk, her head bent in concentration, picking her way through a stack of files. Yeah? I'm Stephanie Plum. I've come to see my cousin Benny. Stephanie Plum, her head came up. I'm Connie Roselli. You went to school with my little sister Tina. Oh, geez. I hope you don't have to make bail. I recognized her now. She was an older version of Tina, thicker in the waist, heavier in the face. She had lots of teased black hair, flawless olive skin, and a 5 o'clock shadow on her upper lip. The only thing I have to make is money, I said to Connie. I hear Benny needs someone to do filing. We just filled that job, and between you and me, you didn't miss anything. It was a crummy job. Paid minimum wage, and you had to spend all days on your knees singing the alphabet song. My feeling is, if you're going to spend that much time on your knees, you could find something that pays better. You know what I mean. Last time I was on my knees was 2 years ago, and I was looking for a contact lens. Listen, if you really need a job, why don't you get Vinny to let you do some skip tracing? There's good money in it. How much money? 10% of the bond. Connie pulled a file from her top drawer. We got this one in yesterday. Bell was set at $100,000, and he didn't show up for a court appearance. If you could find him and bring him in, you get $10,000. I put a hand to the desk to steady myself. $10,000 for finding one guy? What's the catch? Sometimes they don't want to be found, and they shoot at you. But that hardly ever happens. Connie leafed through the file. The guy who came in yesterday is local, Morty Byers. Started tracking him down, so some of the prelims already done. You got pictures and everything. Well, what happened to Morty Byers? Busted appendix. Happened at 11:30 last night. He's in St. Francis with a drain in his side and a tube up his nose. I don't want to wish Morty Bowers any misfortune, but I was starting to get excited about the prospect of stepping in his shoes. The money was tempting and the job title had a certain cachet. On the other hand, catching fugitives sounded scary, and I was a certifiable coward when it came to risking my body parts. My guess is it wouldn't be hard to find this guy, Connie said. You could go talk to his mother, and if it gets hairy, you could back out. What have you got to lose? Only my life. I don't know. I don't like the part about the shooting. Probably it's like driving the turnpike, Connie said. Probably you'd get used to it. The way I see it, living in New Jersey is a challenge. What with the toxic waste and the 18-wheelers and the armed schizophrenics, what's one more lunatic shooting at you? Pretty much my own philosophy, and the $10,000 was damned appealing. I could pay off my creditors and straighten my life out. Okay, I said, I'll do it. Well, you had to talk to Vinny first. Connie swiveled her chair towards Vinny's office door. Hey, Vinny, she yelled. You got business out here. Vinny was 45, 5'7", without his lifts, and had the slim, boneless body of a ferret. He wore pointed-toed shoes, like pointed-breasted women and dark-skinned young men, and he drove a Cadillac Seville. Steph here wants to do some skip tracing, Connie said to Vinny. No way, too dangerous, Vinny said. Most of my agents used to be in security, and you had to know something about law enforcement. I can learn about law enforcement, I told him. Learn about it first and then come back. I need the job now. Not my problem. I figured it was time to get tough. I'll make it your problem, Vinny. I'll have a long talk with Lucille. Lucille was Vinny's wife and the only woman in the burg who didn't know about Vinny's addiction to kinky sex. Lucille had her eyes firmly closed, and it wasn't my place to pry them open. Of course, if she ever asked, that would be a whole other ballgame. You'd blackmail me, your own cousin? These are desperate times. He turned to Connie. Give her a few civil cases, stuff that involves telephone work. I want this one, I said, pointing to the file on Connie's desk. I want the $10,000 one. Forget it, it's a murder. I should have never posted bail, but he was from the burg, and I felt sorry for his mother. Trust me, you don't need this kind of trouble. I need the money, Vinny. Give me a chance of bringing him in. When hell freezes over, Vinny says, I don't get this guy back, I'm in the hole for $100 grand, and I'm not sending an amateur after him. Connie rolled her eyes at me. You think it was out of his pocket. He's owned by the insurance company. It's no big deal. So give me a week, Vinny, I said. If I don't get him in a week, you can turn it over to someone else. I wouldn't give you a half an hour. I took a deep breath, leaned close to Vinny, whispering in his ears, I know about Madame Zartetsky and her whips and chains. I know about the boys, and I know about the duck. He didn't say anything. He just pressed his lips together until they turned white, and I knew I had him. Lucille would throw up if she knew what he did to the duck. Then she'd tell his father, Harry the Hammer, and Harry would cut off Vinny's stick. Who am I looking for? I asked Vinny. Vinny handed him the file. Joseph Morelli. My heart flipped in my chest. I knew Morelli had been involved in a homicide. It had been big news in the burg, and details of the shooting had been splashed across the front page of the Trenton Times. Vice cop kills unarmed man. That had been over a month ago, and other more important issues, like the exact amount of the lottery, had replaced talk of Morelli. In the absence of more information, I assumed the shooting had been in the line of duty. I hadn't realized Morelli had been charged with murder. The reaction wasn't lost to Benny. From the look on your face, I said, "You know him." I nodded. Sold him a cannoli when I was in high school. Connie grunted. "Honey, half of all the women in New Jersey have sold him their cannolis." Thank you for watching First Chapter Friday. Please tune in next week for the next episode in the series. As always, like, comment, and share our video. You can follow our Facebook page or subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos from the library. Thank you again, and we hope you have a great weekend.